Happy birthday, dear Richard. Happy birthday to you.
Okay. Yeah, I don't do this. No.
Speech.
We do have some people who are going to tell us some little stories. Richard, we have some other surprises. We're going to start with Richard Arms. Do you want to share?
Yeah, I will stay seated, but I will try to speak loudly.
Okay, great.
And I think I have the distinction of having known Richard the longest of anyone in this room now. We date back, and in fact, well, you were dating. That's the part of the stories that have been suppressed. Well, we did meet the second day of our graduate school. But in fact, I want to take you back to the time about a year after that. So, those of you who are more like Marty, use your imagination. It's 1970. It's the autumn. Those of you who are somewhat younger may have to believe in past lives, try into mystical stuff. But so it's 1970, and we've made this achievement that we've now passed our first year's physical qualifiers. One of our faculty members pointed out at me that, well, you've passed your qualifier now. I suppose nothing on earth can stop you from getting a PhD. It was sort of an old world era or resignation, I have to admit. but and in fact, he was over optimistic. Not everybody in our class, of course, even after the year. But looking back, I sit there and say, well, was it obvious at that time that Richard was destined to do such good work as he has? And so I will give you the true evidence, that some of it which supports that you might be able to tell that, but some I'm afraid you just couldn't. For example, you might say, well, what was he best known in the department among his classmates and his housemates for? What was his primary quality? And I think there's no doubt about that. It was number one, he was, I would say, renowned for his prowess as a trencherman. He could consume vast dinners, something like this one, but oh, seconds please, yes. Oh, thirds, yeah, that's a good night, maybe the third hour. But what really won him his fame was after that, then, well, it's time for dessert. So one quart of ice cream, and he would consume a quart of ice cream by himself. And in fact, by direct observation, I noticed that age has weakened him somewhat. But even at the reception last night, I can see that he still maintains his capability to eat a fair bit of food. Regrettably, I cannot think of any positive correlation or negative correlation between success as a trencherman and success in X-ray astronomy. It seems to be totally uncorrelated and has no bearing. So it's just a total, there was nothing from that we could have predicted it from. The other claim to fame, I think, will be a little more surprising to people in the room, those who don't know, is his athletic prowess. I mean, you might not know, look at it right now, but in fact, the two of us were the much feared and fierce tackles in American football on our physics graduate school intramural football team. We were the two tackles, and basically, Rich excelled at the capability to, whoever got in his way, to just knock them down and get to wherever he was going to, namely the other quarterback, of course. and that can actually be a very valuable thing. There are careers built on that. So, in Rich's case, of course, this is a totally false lead, because anyone who's worked with him knows that far from pushing people aside and grabbing credit, he actually works with people, tries to bring people into the group, and gives ideas freely and to all, and is very cooperative. So this I mean, if his most significant achievement was irrelevant, the second most was just basically misleading. It was just wrong. But I did have an opportunity, which was not widely known, to find out, well, something that in hindsight I recognize really did have a significant influence. And of course, since we had just graduated, since we just passed our qualifier, that called, as they would say, an animal house for road trip, right? I mean, so we decided to form a, got together in my trusty old '64 Rambler, and in those days it was very easy. We packed things together, the food, the beer, plenty of beer, more beer, and then just headed south. You take away, Freeway 5 from San Diego, head south. You hit the Mexican border. In those days, it's easy to go across. No visas, passports, anything required. You go through Tijuana and just head on south down the coast highway. There were all these lovely beaches that were white sandy beaches. Eventually, you got 30, 40, 50 miles down the road. No one in sight at all. So we drove down until we found a totally isolated beach. Went swimming, and then as the afternoon wore on, came back and started consuming food and beer, and of course engaging in conversation from profound to profane. I mean, what can you say? It covered the watermarks. I do recall that as darkness fell, we were finally getting around to waxing philosophical under the influence of a few six tracks, and that maybe on a serious note, we were obviously telling amusing stories about the idiosyncrasies of our professors and things like that you would expect. Maybe with some ulterior motives, regretting the lack of women in physics. I mean, you'd like to think it was purely social justice, but at that age we were not always. We did have some ulterior motives, I have to admit. But then we got even into deep philosophical thoughts. For example, probably the most serious one that I recall was the deep philosophical similarities between the situation of Schrodinger's cat and the situation of young male physicists awaiting the draft lottery for Vietnam. That was probably as serious as we got. And so we were going on in this style and getting, the function, the amount of beer remaining was monotonically decreasing in a very satisfying fashion. And all of a sudden, as it's totally dark out, Rich breaks out into this incredible, as Rich only can do, excited, loud voice. Wow, look at that. And, so we all start looking out at the, at some local village, become offended that we're sitting there on the beach and not see anything. Here. And so we look, he said, no, and as we look, I don't see anything. No, up in the sky. And so we start looking up in the sky. And what? And he said, the Milky Way. The Milky Way. You can see the Milky Way. And it's this incredible enthusiasm of wanting to share this fact with us. And, some of us under the influence of, maybe one is diplomatically saying, well, yeah, it's there every night, So, I grew up in Wyoming. I've seen the Milky Way hundreds of times on dark nights. And I was stunned to learn that Rich, having grown up in New York, had only seen the Milky Way in a planetarium. That was the first time he ever saw it. But what I didn't recognize, except in hindsight, is that it was that level of enthusiasm, wanting to share his joy in the enthusiasm, that I think, in fact, accounts for a great deal of his success in the future. And as it turns out, he needed that enthusiasm in his career, because shortly after that he got the, I guess I would say, ad astra per aspera, with apologies to my high school Latin teacher, phase of his career where he had some challenges, let us say. And it began with, at that time, his thesis advisor fired him from his job. That became, it was even worsened because he had a different faculty member, instead of the arm around the shoulder sympathies, I would say, gave him some unwanted lecture in advice saying, well, yes, that was not only totally justified that you were fired, but in fact you don't have the proper enthusiasm, nor do you have the talent, and you really ought to consider dropping out and getting an alternate career. Not exactly what some people want to hear in the second or so year of your grad school research. But fortunately, most of the faculty were made of wiser stuff. And that's actually how Rich came to be a researcher in Larry Peterson's X-ray group, and that's why he's in X-ray astronomy. And of course, he proved Larry Peterson to be more amply correct. I don't know, I think we can argue about whether it was factors of 2 to 4 or factors of 10, orders of magnitude, that he increased the scientific output of that group. So he here at the graduate group, but immediately he began, as is done ever since, publishing papers, writing left, working with people, getting results up, to the extent that by the time he graduated, he actually was faced with yet a different career dilemma. He had 2 superb postdoc offers, both of which he really wanted. One, as you probably know, he's a graduate from undergraduate school from MIT. He, to this day, proudly wears his brass rat class ring. I believe he's still got it on today, yes. Hasn't shed it. And so one of the offers was a very attractive offer of working in the X-ray group at MIT. And I have no doubt he would have been immensely successful in taking that offer. But it was made difficult because he also had this offer at Goddard, where they had mounds of data yearning to be processed to turn into academic applications. He was just desperate. And so he, agonized, consulted his friends and colleagues, and we all advised him, said, no, the job at Goddard will be perfect for you. Now, fortunately, we can't be proven wrong, so we can always say, I can tell him, I told you so now. But he took the job at Goddard, and of course the rest is history. He did a wonderful job there. And there is sometimes, I was able to witness a beautiful, ironic, it shows that karma, in a sense, has a good ironic sense of humor. I mean, what can I say? He did so well at Goddard that he in fact won the most prestigious award there, the Scientist of the Year. And to honor that, I mean, this one scientist out of the entire center honored per year, a very rare honor. And of course, they had a big to do about it with invited very prominent speakers, or a prominent speaker to give a suitable lecture. And as it turned out, known to some of us in the audience, but not widely advertised, the invited speaker was actually the person who had fired him from his job. But not necessarily the one responsible for it, but the one who had done it. Yeah, right. And in fact, in all fairness, this person had long since reconciled with Rich, and they got along fine. But I could not escape the sense that karma does have a sense of humor. Well, Rich, of course, didn't just rest on his laurels and he continued to be productive. And it's only fair to say that he didn't just produce results on his own. He improved the whole group. I've heard different estimates during this meeting, but he was very willing to share his ideas with other people and try to draw them into research. And his enthusiasm, brought in all sorts of younger people, including people even as young as Meg, Gary, and into the field. But he was the whole group benefited from the fact that he would try to get people together, fill out these ideas in profusion. Estimates from the sampling at this meeting arranged that between 1% and 5% of his ideas were good, but they were so prolific that in fact he was found people with wonderful ideas. And every group that he joined in, both at Goddard and now more recently at the University of Maryland, has benefited not just from his research, but from inspiring these other people to collaborate and do wonderful work. And I do think that in fact, and also the fact that he overcome the challenges of being fired and told to get out of the field, by some of his faculty people at UCSD, was it was the fact that he had a true enthusiasm and love for the field. And of course, not all of his discoveries were rediscoveries and unpublishable results, like the fact that the Milky Way being he did discover some more original work too, which he resulted in his vast publication. But the thing that I find amazing is that he still retains that incredible sense of enthusiasm, willingness to share, and trying to get everyone, not just himself, but everyone around him, to improve the quality of their research, and then basically just have a great, good time. And so I guess if I get my glass here, wine, I'd like you to all join me in wishing many more years of highly productive research and just plain pure fun in astrophysics.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.